I'm Vinny Politan. Thanks so much for joining us here tonight on Closing Arguments. Great to have you here. Now, anytime I talk about this story of this young couple, to me, it is Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, the murder trial, okay? Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, dysfunctional, right? Absolutely dysfunctional. This one is about love to a certain extent. It's about sex to a big extent. And it's about murder. That's what makes it a little different than the Johnny Depp case, so actually a lot different. Thank goodness in that case no one, took it a step further in the violence in that relationship, but it happened with this young couple. And we begin, they were in a real relationship. They, were together in Texas and decided to move to Florida. They're young, they've got some money, and they seem to actually, to some extent, have feelings towards one another. It's so hard for me to put it in those terms because we know the ending here, but they were together, they took trips together, they lived together, but like many people, there were problems. Now, something else that they did together, a little different than Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, they met when they were making a movie. These two, in their relationship, made some porn together. Now, it was pay-per-view type of pornography that she posted on her OnlyFans site, along with other videos where she's by herself. But that's how they made millions of dollars. Millions of dollars. That is a big part of their relationship, which turned into their lifestyle. Living a very lavish lifestyle, being so young, as both of them were. Now, the bottom line here is we know that Courtney stabbed Christian. We know that. Okay, that's not going to be disputed at trial. It's very, very clear. The evidence is overwhelming. The question is, well, what was it? What will the jury determine it was? Was this self-defense? Was this murder? Was this manslaughter? It's a huge question, and there's a big difference between all three of them. Big, big difference. Murder, you're locked up, you're going away, you're not getting out. Manslaughter, you're going to do time, but you'll get out. Self-defense, you're going home at the end of the trial. So that's what is at stake here. But the bottom line is, she did stab him, she did kill him. Now, let me give you a few more of the details of this case. Take a listen. A social media sensation, now a suspected killer. 26-year-old Courtney Taylor Clenney is charged with second-degree murder in the death of her 27-year-old boyfriend, Christian Obunselli.
The chief medical examiner of Miami-Dade County determined that Christian's cause of death was a stab to the chest. Christian was stabbed as the knife punctured the subclavian artery in his right chest.
It all happened following a fight at the couple's luxury apartment in Miami's upscale Edgewater neighborhood. And prosecutors say fights were common in this volatile relationship.
Evidence gathered during the investigation of Christian's death showed that since November of 2020, he and the defendant, Clenney, had been involved in an extremely tempestuous and combative relationship.
The prosecutor's office would later release text messages where Obunselli confronts Clenney for slashing him with a knife more than once. They also released secret audio recordings taken by the victim.
Don't touch me!
What is going on? What are you gonna get this mad at me when I'm apologizing to you?
No, Christian.
Like, you're thinking I'm doing it on
purpose? Drop your high pitch.
Okay, I'm not doing it on purpose.
You just are. You know well the right thing to do is to tell me.
Yes, and I am so sorry.
So shut up and let me slap you.
Officials say their apartment building management received so many complaints about their loud fights, they came close to being evicted. Building cameras captured this fight in February, just weeks before Obunselli was killed. Clenney's attorney notes that the elevator video does not depict the events leading up to the altercation, and in a statement said Obumseli was the abuser, the worst kind of abuser. He would manipulate and abuse Courtney in private when he thought nobody was around. Her attorney claims she was acting in self-defense after Obumseli attacked her. In his statement to Court TV, Frank Prieto states, "It is an absolute injustice to charge a victim of domestic violence and human trafficking with a crime." He went on to say, "We will vigorously defend Courtney and clear her of this unfounded and baseless charge." This body cam footage was taken the day before the stabbing.
Right now, like, I have not always been the victim, but like right now, I'm the freaking victim in the situation. I'm scared to go downstairs.
All right, so what do you want us to do?
I want to be like, I want to be like exonerated, I guess, of like anything wrong. And I want him, okay, the police are here. I want a restraining order against Christian Obumseli.
The OnlyFans star first rose to fame as a bodybuilder.
My name is Courtney Taylor, and I'm about 8 days out from my first show, the NPC West Coast Classic. And today we're going to hit some back and vice, so let's get started.
She soon became a social media celebrity with some 2 million followers on Instagram, where she frequently posted pictures of the man she's now accused of murdering.
This homicide has gained some notoriety since the defendant, Clenney, is an internet social media personality and influencer under the name of Courtney Taylor.
Now Clenney is finding that her fame has a downside.
Yeah, you should go, because you just killed your boyfriend. Yeah, you did.
So Courtney Clenney in court today. She showed up, her lawyers there, the prosecutors there. They're having what's called an Arthur hearing. Ultimately, it will be about whether or not she gets out on bond before this trial, because right now she is locked up. Let me show you a little piece of some of the testimony from the detective from the Miami Police Department as he describes what she described happening. Courtney, take a listen.
She told me that she was at the apartment. The victim had went down to go to Subway's. When he went to Subway's, they began to message each other, and through text messages, they got into an argument over sharing each other's location. He then decides to come back to the apartment. Shortly after he comes back to the apartment, another argument ensues. At that point, the defendant says that the victim grabbed her by the neck, slammed her against the wall. She was able to break free. And then she was gonna call her mother, and he didn't want that to happen, so he grabbed her and put her onto the ground. She wasn't able to explain how exactly that happened. After that, she was able to break free once again, at which point she goes to the kitchen. She grabs on a knife, and then she states that the victim ran towards her, and that's when she flung the knife, or threw it, and it hit him in the shoulder.
Wow. All right. Let's break some of this down, get some more details. Joining me now, has been breaking a lot of news on this case, a reporter with Miami Herald. David Ovalle is back with us. David, great to see you. Always the festive shirt, always makes me think if we're down in South Florida. So, David, let me start here with the argument. Is it all about simple jealousy like we see in so many other relationships where, hey, you're not sharing your location with me, what are you up to?
I think certainly that's a reoccurring theme in a lot of these arguments. I mean, certainly we heard in one of the recordings earlier that was released from a few months previous, I think Courtney had gotten mad at Christian over him, speaking to one of her friends that he ran into out on the street and not telling her, right? But I think it goes much beyond that. I think it's just a toxic relationship where that would devolve into fights for every little thing. We all know people who have been in relationships like that, but this ends up being sort of next level toxicity.
And we've seen that, we've heard that, we know how it ends, but why were they together? Was there any indication on why they remained together? Because, you know, I've spoken to neighbors from Texas. They were fighting in Texas, yet they're still together. Any indication? Have you been able to figure that out through your investigation?
I think when you read their text message strings, it's a lot of sort of a dependence, whether it's emotional and maybe in Christian's case, financial dependence on each other. So, they profess to not like each other anymore, that it's over, don't talk to me anymore, don't call me anymore, particularly in Courtney's case. And then it's, something bad happens, the blow up happens, and then it's the same pattern of, I'm sorry, you don't deserve that, we can make this work. So I think oftentimes, and you see this in a lot of domestic violence relationships, where they're sort of clinging to that initial phase of what it was like when they first got together. So you see this even in their text messages, where they're sort of hearkening back to, what it was like, sort of like the good times, and just ignoring all the bad, toxic things that are happening.
And again, I'll get right back to it. I mean, we all experienced that watching the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial. And those are two people with millions of dollars, access to anyone they want to be with in the world, yet there was something that was there for them. I guess the same was happening here. I want to take a listen to more of the detective's testimony from today's hearing because there's a big issue about some potential bruises that were on the body of Courtney Clenney. Let's take a listen.
The bruising on her arms, were you able to see them in the Instagram live video?
Yes.
And again, that video was posted before this murder occurred.
Correct.
So those bruises were before the murder occurred?
Yes.
Let's talk about the legs. You saw bruising on her legs in the earlier posted video of her death?
Yes.
In that video, are those the same bruises you saw later that day?
Yes.
So trying to put a timeline together here, David, my understanding is that there's an Instagram video live that she posts before the stabbing, but the same day, and there are bruises on her body at that point that are then part of I think, pictures that the defense has brought forth showing that she was somehow a victim that day.
Correct. And what the prosecution maintains by bringing out that these bruises were visible prior to the incident is that we don't know where these came from, right? This was not as a direct result of whatever altercation happened that led to Christian's death. So I think that the prosecution hasn't shied away from the fact that this was sort of a mutually toxic relationship, right? There was, they can't account for every single, episode of rage and outbursts on both sides, but they can certainly piece together what happened the day of, and they do not believe those bruises were as a result of whatever happened in those minutes in which Christian died.
Now, the bruises may be used to show a prior incident, I'm not sure, but have you seen, because I have not seen, whether it's in a text message, a recording, or anywhere else, evidence of Christian attacking Courtney, of Christian being the aggressor in a physical confrontation? Have you seen or heard or read any evidence connected to that?
No, not directly. There's been some hints about some of the witnesses saying, oh, well, they believed Christian was the aggressor. For example, in one of the incidents, I think less than 48 hours before the stabbing, there was some of the employees might have been talking about, well, they thought that he was sort of charging at her. But there's sort of it ends up sort of being a wash because, she ends up downplaying that incident, right? But no, as of what I've seen in terms of text messages and the evidence that we have so far, I haven't seen anything to say that Christian ever, laid any hands on her. That being said, we've only seen stuff from his phone. The defense has made a point of saying that it's only coming from his phone, from his accounts. So we don't know what's on her phones that might have evidence of any potential attacks.
Speaking of the defense, I think it's going to be a very aggressively tried case by Courtney's attorney, Frank Prieto. Let's take a listen to what he had to say today.
Out of respect for the process involved in this Arthur hearing, we're not going to make any comments until the conclusion of the hearing. So Thursday, after we believe the hearing will be concluded, then we'll make some comments. But for now, out of respect for the process, we have no comments.
You feel optimistic?
Thank you. Always optimistic. Always optimistic. Look forward to vigorously defending her.
All right, David, what do we know about Frank Prieto? He seems to be a very competent and confident attorney, but he's made, in some of the statements he's released, he's said that she's the victim of abuse. She's also the victim of trafficking. So what do you make of all that?
Well, I think as in Courtney and Christian's online lives where the narrative was a certain way, I think there's, a narrative that's emerging from the defense, and they're trying to press all of that home because they know this case is being very much watched across the world. So, it's a media sensational case, and her lawyers certainly want to get out her version of things. So it's not to be, it's not unexpected.
All right, David Ovalle is going to stay with us. We've got more to get to from today, plus coming up in the next hour. In Waukesha, Wisconsin, a difficult day filled with heavy emotions as victims and family members delivered their victim impact statements in front of the Christmas parade massacre killer, Darrell Brooks.
I have never experienced such a painful level of sadness.
We, the jury, find the defendant guilty.
Darrell Brooks, who is representing himself, is set to learn his fate.
And you'll see it all right here on Court TV.
The deadly parade crash sentencing continues Wednesday on Court TV.
The killer was a clown. The defendant ended up marrying the victim's husband.
This is going to be a riveting case.
The Killer Clown Murder Trial. Live coverage coming soon on Court TV.
Do you remember throwing the glass?
No, I don't. But that sounds like me, so.
I don't remember throwing the glass, but it sounds like me. Wow. Now that is from July of 2021 out in Vegas. David Ovalle is still with us, Miami Herald reporter who's been breaking a lot of news on this story from the beginning. David, let's talk about Vegas. I mean, this was another relatively serious incident. Again, reminds me of Johnny Depp and Amber Heard with glasses flying. What do we know about what happened in Vegas?
So this was an incident where they went to Vegas, and it was just supposed to be a vacation. They were living in Texas at the time, and they get into it. And I believe, if I remember the police report correctly, Christian was actually a little bit annoyed with her because he was tired of just going out and partying and drinking all the time. And they got into an argument, and he just wanted to be on the couch. And then I think they got into this big blow-up fight, and she ends up throwing objects at him. So she ends up getting charged with, minor, I think it was a misdemeanor battery. And ultimately, she was never convicted of it, but it does it is relevant for the state in the Miami case because this shows sort of this ongoing pattern of her, throwing things, being physical, being violent with Christian, according to the state.
Also coming up today during the testimony was she has a prior DUI in Texas, a DUI in California. So it seems like this is sort of a pattern with her and may play a role in this case, which is, what was she doing? Was she drinking? Was she taking any sort of drugs at the time all this stuff was happening?
Yeah, I think there is definitely an issue with Courtney and substances, right? I mean, the police in the video you're showing right now, where she's in the lobby of their apartment building, they suspected that she was intoxicated, right? You read the text messages, and they're often talking about doing cocaine and buying drugs and going out and partying, and it almost to the exasperation of Christian, because he seems to sort of be going along with it because she wants to be doing all these drugs. So there's definitely an issue, and of course she was in rehab at the time when she was actually arrested in August. So certainly that could play into the case, but again, that's not an excuse for a homicide. It's not an excuse for murder under state law in Florida.
Absolutely. And I think it actually becomes more problematic for her than any sort of defense. Now, the detective today also testified about text messages, and we've been talking a lot about text messages. She admitted in those text messages that she stabbed Christian and called him racial slurs.
Yeah, so there's text messages, and then there's also the undercover recordings that he took in the last couple months of his life, where the text messages talks about various attacks that have gone on over the past year, right? So there was one incident from last year when he's talking about being stabbed in the leg, that he could barely walk and how painful it was. There was another instance of her hitting him over the head and throwing things at him, and to the point where he thought he had a mild concussion. And then there was previous to in the months before his death, where she actually stabbed him right here, like in the chin area, and also on the cheek, and he actually had to go to the hospital. And there was sort of a chilling line that the state put in their court filings, where and it's in the text messages where she texts him, enjoy the hospital, right? And he's sort of covering up and says, no, I'm just going to tell them that it was a football incident. So there was sort of a string of troubling incidents that sort of lay the foundation of this backdrop of what went into this incident when Christian was killed.
Yeah, and I get back to what we were discussing before, which is I know some allegations have been made that he was abusing her to a certain extent, that there was some mutual abuse, but again, kind of like in the Johnny Depp trial, as we hear the evidence, see the evidence, read the text messages, and hear the recordings, I don't see or hear the abuse going the other way. I don't see her getting hurt. He's getting cut here, cut there, and ultimately stabbed to death. This is something else. David's going to stay with us. We've got more to get to on today's hearing. We're also going to bring in some more guests. We're going to bring in Joseph Scott Morgan, death investigator, to talk about Courtney's claim that she threw the knife. Now, if you throw the knife, could you throw the knife hard enough that it would stick in his shoulder and sever his artery and kill him? Or do you have to do it another way? We'll also bring in Dr. Robbie Ludwig to talk about some of these text messages and allegations of mutual abuse and that little I love you that she whispered in court today. Don't go away.
0095.
When it is 5 a.m.,
Decide whether or not you're done gaslighting me. Decide whether or not you're done gaslighting.
I am mad that you told me to come.
Decide right now.
Courtney, that's a threat. I asked you so many times that I don't know, and I apologize. But you hit me.
Shut the Don't.
Secret recording made by Christian Obamseli. Now, She's accusing him of gaslighting her, but he's like, I apologized after she hit him. This relationship, I don't see anything that tells me that she's being abused. It may exist somewhere, but I haven't seen it yet. I have not seen it yet. All right, let's take a listen to more testimony from today's hearing. You have the detective on the witness stand talking about the scene of the death. Let's take a listen.
The 3 different blood scenes. Will you please explain to the court what that means?
So the first one that we find is where we initially found the victim, which is the first puddle of blood. The second one was more towards the living room. And then the third one was, it was more between blood spatter and droplets that were moved around through, well, not moved around, but showed that the victim walked around the apartment.
Let's bring back in our guest, still with us, reporter with Miami Herald, David Ovalle, breaking a lot of news on this. And joining me now in Jacksonville, Alabama, professor of forensics at Jacksonville State University, former senior investigator for the Fulton County Medical Examiner's Office, and host of the Body Bags podcast, downloaded after the show, not during the show, Joseph, but after the show. Joseph Scott Morgan is with us. Joseph, let me start here. The allegation or the story that she told to the detective that we heard in court today was that she threw the knife and it hit his shoulder. He died because his subclavian artery was, I guess, severed, pierced, and he bled out. So could you throw a knife and do that type of damage?
Perhaps if you were trained with a throwing knife, not the knife she used. Throwing knives are highly balanced, weighted instruments, that takes quite a bit of skill in order to generate enough energy to get them down range. A throwing knife works, it has to spin through the air, and you have to create velocity. A lot of it is dependent upon how much leverage you can get when you throw. You have to have a correct release point. It's generally at about this height. You release it, and it has to be absolute. You have to be targeting that area. I guess we could go with, if they want to go down this road, they could say it's a 1 in a million shot. But here's the problem. The subclave vessel that they're talking about, and very simply, that means beneath the collarbone, your clavicle. It has to penetrate pretty deeply, Vin. I ask viewers at home and I've talked about this case in my class in particular at JSU. If you've ever been to one of these establishments where they throw the hatchets and it sticks in the board, that creates, and you're winding up to do this, and you're leveraging that instrument downrange, it spins. Even the strongest person that throws this thing downrange, it only penetrates maybe, I don't know, maybe 2 inches into the board at the most, and that's with somebody that really is practiced at it. I cannot imagine in any universe where a one-off individual could take a knife, a kitchen knife, a serrated knife nonetheless, I've seen this thing, and throw it downrange and hit her target perfectly and take him to the knee, take him to his knees. This is something that has to be driven in, man.
Let's take a listen to more testimony from the detective talking about the injury.
The results of that autopsy, did he determine a manner of death?
Yes.
What was that manner of death?
By stabbing.
Okay. Did he rule the death any particular manner?
No. Oh, I mean, yes, homicide.
Okay. At any point in time, did you become aware that it was impossible to have thrown the knife? Or at least that was the opinion?
Objection.
I'm just asking.
Can you repeat the question?
At any point in time, did you become aware that the throwing of a knife could not have caused that injury?
Yes.
Let me ask you, Joseph, we know in every trial there's a battle of the experts. Do you think that there's an expert out there who could come inside that courtroom and say, oh yeah, you could throw that knife and do that type of damage?
Well, there's an expert out there in knife throwing, I'm sure. I don't know that they could assess her level of expertise and skill at doing this, because this is very exacting work that we're talking about. You know, people talk about with firearms this idea of stopping power. Even with the most effective knife thrower, it's negligible at best that you're going to stop somebody that's advancing on you. Again, these things don't go very deep. They're very painful and that sort of thing. But this wound is very, very deep. That's the reason the ME, they came to the conclusion that this is a stabbing. Notice he didn't say that this is a throwing incident, a projectile, as it were. This is a stabbing. That's what the ME. And I can tell you, their opinion is going to be very solid in this case, and they're going to carry a lot of weight in that courtroom.
David Ovalle, let me ask you about the circumstances, what we've learned so far about that moment when the knife is plunged in. He doesn't die immediately.
No, Christian does not die immediately, and it's actually really heartbreaking because you can hear in the 911 call, you actually hear him in the background talking about how, you know, I can't feel my arm, I can't feel my arm. You can sort of hear the life slipping out of him. So yes, it was not something that was instantaneous. Not sure how much pain he felt, but certainly the medical examiners may be able to talk about that when the medical examiner, when he testifies on Thursday.
Joseph, let me ask you, do you think if she rendered him aid right away, she could have saved him?
I don't know if he had had a team of thoracic surgeons that were standing by with a crash kit at that point that she could have. The subclavicular injury that he sustained is a tough one. That's, you know, that used to be one of the main sites that emergency room personnel would go into in order to blast drugs into the system of somebody that's in a failure at that point in time. It's a very critical vessel, and to be able to get to him, I don't know that would have been a possibility. I do know this: when I saw that knife laying on the floor in that blood, the first thing that struck me is possibly if she had left that knife in place, he would have had a better chance. You know what they say: if you're impaled or something stuck within you, don't remove it. She signed his death warrant. If she's the one that did it, remove that knife. I can't imagine any EMT removing that knife from his chest because they're trained to do different. When she pulled that out of there, he began to bleed out profusely.
David, we've seen some photographs, and we're seeing some of them now, that have now been released. I mean, there is just a lot of blood on her. And we've heard the descriptions of all the blood at the scene that day as well.
Yeah, it was definitely not a clean crime scene whatsoever. And, you know, I think it just sort of tells you something about the intimate nature of this killing, right? This wasn't a shooting from a distance. This wasn't, you know, somebody hit by a car. This was an up close and personal stabbing, according to the state. And that's why they ended up charging her with second-degree murder.
Joseph, do you think there's going to be testimony that you can piece together what all this blood, the blood stains and the blood patterns, will they tell a story? Or is it just too much of a mess and too much blood to really kind of piece it together forensically after the fact?
Well, I think you don't really need a bloodstain expert in this case, in the sense that one big question that'll be asked by prosecutors, Finn, when they stare into the eyes of that jury, how much of that blood was hers? Because I don't know. I saw those images that the lawyer put up the other day with the bruises, the green and yellow bruises, the receding bruises that they put up. I don't see any evidence that she sustained any kind of bloodletting event. She no insults where she's bleeding out and you've got a commingling of blood. Now, you can look at the blood stains on the floor, the swipes, the wipes, you know, where you're dragging through. There's a great image of that yellow receding bruise that they demonstrate, I think, as being fresh. That's, you know, you look at a bruise like that, that's at least 5 days downrange. You know, we use those in child abuse cases. So I don't know what they were attempting to prove with those. But to the point of the blood, yeah, you can talk about some of the activity that he stepped in it, tracked it around. But look, if any of us are gasping for breath, we feel our life slipping away from us, we're trying to get help. Yeah, he's bleeding out. He's stepping in his own blood. It just paints an even more horrific picture that the blood expert is going to get up there and talk about. And it's going to be a real hard hill for the defense to climb, I think.
All right, guests staying with us. We've got more from inside the courtroom today, plus coming up next hour. Tonight, we'll take a closer listen to these statements and take a look at the reaction of the killer.
Mr. Brooks, this is a sentencing hearing.
I don't care what it is. You're not going to continue.
He is arguing with me. He is now forfeiting.
You're not going to continue. You're not going to continue.
Why he's moved to the next courtroom.
What is going on? Like, what are you going to get this mad at me when I'm apologizing to you?
No, Christian.
Like, you're thinking I'm doing it on
Drop your attitude. Drop your high pitch.
Okay, I'm not doing it on purpose.
You trust all right. You know well the right thing to do is to tell me.
Yes, and I am so sorry.
So shut up and let me slap you.
You're not going to slap me.
Give me my phone.
You have your phone.
I don't have it anymore. Find it and charge it.
What?
Shut up so I can slap you. It's incredibly tragic because he stayed. He stayed with her. He stayed with her after that. That's Christian Obamselli. He was stabbed to death by Courtney Clenney, his girlfriend. She's been charged with murder. She's claiming self-defense. I think there's going to be a trial in this one. Still with us tonight, David Ovalle, Joseph Scott Morgan, and joining us now by phone in New York City, psychotherapist, host of Talking Live on Facebook Watch and the Bite Side podcast, Dr. Robbie Ludwig. Dr. Robbie, I want to roll some video for everybody at home of Courtney Clenney in court today. And as she comes in this moment, she turns and I love you. And I saw a video of who was in the gallery, and it appeared to be her parents. Then in a later moment, she's in tears. She's in tears with her handcuffs and her orange jumpsuit inside the courtroom. Dr. Robbie, what do you think's going on through that 26-year-old mind?
One, two, three, four.
Dr. Robbie, obviously we're having trouble connecting with her. She's not hearing me. David Ovalle, I thought I saw Courtney Clenney's parents inside the courtroom today. There was a couple that, had that look about them. Do we know if they were there?
Yes, Courtney's parents were in the courtroom, and his mother was actually possibly could have testified. I guess she still could, just to authenticate the photos of the bruises that were put into evidence. So, I think she will end up being a witness at some point because of the fact that she was on the phone with Courtney during the time of the murder. So.
And there again, you see her kind of making contact with her parents, waving goodbye as it was time to leave the courtroom. Is Dr. Robbie with us? Do you hear me, Dr. Robbie?
I hear you. I hear you. I'm so sorry.
No. Hey, listen, it's a live show. That's why we love doing it live. So, Dr. Robbie, the question I had for you was, she comes in, she mouths "I love you" to her parents who are in the gallery. Then we see her a little bit later on. She's in tears inside that courtroom. What are your thoughts about where her head might be these days, now that she's been locked up for a while?
Well, it sounds like she has a tremendous appreciation for her parents, who at this point are probably the only ones who are supporting her emotionally and providing her with the love and stability that she needs. And she has a tremendous appreciation for that, especially given what she's done and where she's at in prison. It's not a pleasant place. So she is dealing with the very harsh realities, and it sounds like there's some regret there. We have to remember that this is a person who was out of control, and the killing was a result of her being out of control. It was not, a first-degree murder where she was plotting and planning. So this is a girl whose life is completely unraveling and a complete mess, and her parents are a touchstone for comfort.
And one other question I had for you, which is, and we've been talking about this throughout the hour, is that the allegations are that it was a mutual abuse, kind of like Johnny Depp allegations were, right? It's going back and forth, back and forth. Yet all the recordings I hear, the text messages I read, the injuries that I see, it seems like he's the only one getting hurt. And he keeps apologizing to her, like he's apologizing to her after he got hit. He apologized to her after he got stabbed. What is that?
You know, when somebody is in an abusive relationship, they just want to placate the person that they love. And on some level, they realize they always have to prove themselves. And it comes from low self-esteem and a fear of losing this person that they love. Obviously, you know, this man was attracted to Courtney for a reason. It probably was a familiar type of traumatic love he experienced. As far as Courtney, you know, there is perception and reality. And what we see sometimes with these very disturbed individuals is that they feel that they are being abused. She could distort reality. She could have felt he was trying to make her jealous. She could have felt like he was cheating on her, whether that was true or not true, that her mind went to certain places and that became her reality. And so in her mind, she considered herself a victim of abuse. And in the objective reality, that may not be the case. So that could be what we're seeing here.
Joseph Scott Morgan, I think I have an unscientific question to ask you right now, which is you've been to more death scenes than any of us, more than most people in the world. What are your thoughts about domestic violence and death scenes? Like what? And it's a wide open question, but I'm really fascinated your thoughts, because we describe this relationship, and then it results in the scene that people like you have to respond to.
Well, relative to domestic cases, and you'll hear this from police officers, you know, talking about how dangerous they are. But for me, seeing the aftermath, I don't recall any case outside the realm of domestic violence where you see the level of violence. There is passion that's involved. There's an attempt to destroy. That's kind of cliched. You hear that in the movies, but that's literal. Particularly when sharp force injuries are involved, you'll see just horrible, brutal injuries. And I think a lot can potentially, particularly for us on the outside of this case, be read into this. She preferred knives, obviously. You know, she stabbed this poor guy in the leg, cut his chin. It's a very threatening, menacing way to live. I think I don't guess she had access to a handgun. She's not walking around with a hammer, but she does in fact have a knife. And she had apparently gotten very used to having this thing around. So Lord only knows what went on behind closed doors, but I can tell you, relative to domestic homicide, you're not going to be able to take the measure of how violent these things are if you've never been to one. They're just horrific.
All right, big thanks, David Ovalle, Miami Herald, Dr. Robbie Ludwig, and Joseph Scott Morgan. Appreciate your time. We'll speak again very, very soon.